20 most inbred families in world history. What happens when the quest for pure bloodlines goes too far? From royal empires to remote villages, history is filled with families whose desire to preserve power led to heartbreaking consequences. Join us as we reveal the hidden cost of inbreeding, where genetic fate, isolation, and ambition collide in stories both fascinating and tragic. Hi everyone, it's me from Past Not Past, and I've got a quick update. This channel's having some tech issues, so we'll only post here once or twice a week. But good news. We've launched a brand new channel where we're now uploading 1 to 3 videos every day, full of the same nostalgic stories you love. Check out the link below, hit subscribe, and let's keep the memories alive, together. The Whitakers of West Virginia. Tucked deep in the secluded hills of odd West Virginia, lives a family whose existence feels like something out of a haunting Appalachian legend. But this isn't fiction. It's the true and unsettling story of the Whitakers, a family so profoundly isolated that their communication has been reduced to guttural sounds, grunts, and barks. It's not just sad, it's deeply unsettling. This isn't just another wild internet rumor. Back in 2000, photographer Mark Leda ventured into their world and captured their reality on film, revealing a life most of us can barely imagine. His photos pulled back the curtain on physical deformities and serious cognitive impairments, heartbreaking effects tied to generations of inbreeding. But the story doesn't end with the pictures. The Whitakers live behind a veil of secrecy. Locals in the area, perhaps out of loyalty or concern, rarely talk about them. So many questions hang in the air. Where exactly did they come from? How serious are their conditions? No one seems willing or able to give straight answers. Some even whisper that the family might be distantly connected to a wealthy, long-standing clan in the region, though there's no real proof. Just old rumors that refuse to die. This mystery only deepens the eerie fascination surrounding them. Seeing their situation firsthand, Leda didn't just walk away. He started a GoFundMe campaign to help support them, trying to shine a bit of light on their dark reality. And in doing so, he brought national attention to the devastating human toll of generational inbreeding. The Whitaker story calls to mind other tragic cases like the infamous Colt family of Australia, where isolation and secrecy fed a cycle of abuse and suffering. The Fugate family of Kentucky. The story of the Fugate family, tucked away in the quiet hills of Kentucky's Appalachian region, is one of the most unique and visually striking cases of inherited genetics in American history. It all began in the early 1800s when Martin Fugate and Elizabeth Smith, both unknowingly carrying a rare recessive gene, settled near Troublesome Creek. What followed was a multi-generational journey marked by isolation, intermarriage, and a condition that gave the family their unforgettable nickname, the Blue Fugates. The condition is called methemoglobinemia, a rare blood disorder that affects how oxygen is delivered throughout the body. The result? A noticeable bluish tint to the skin, especially the lips, hands, and face. When 4 of Martin and Elizabeth's 7 children were born with blue skin, the recessive gene's presence became undeniable, and in such a secluded region, its legacy took root quickly. In this remote Appalachian enclave, geographic isolation meant there were few new families moving in, and few opportunities to marry outside the community. Intermarriage became commonplace, not out of desire but necessity. This, in turn, kept the rare genes circulating through the generations. Cases like Zachariah Fugate marrying his aunt and others' wedding cousins further cemented the condition's persistence within the family and surrounding neighbors. Perhaps the most iconic figure of them all was Luna Fugate, often referred to as the bluest of them all. Despite her deep blue complexion, Luna lived a full life. She married, gave birth to 13 children, and lived to the age of 84. Her children also inherited the signature skin tone, but by most accounts they were healthy and resilient, showing that despite the visual difference, the condition didn't define their physical well-being. One particularly poignant moment comes from a question once posed to a family member. If you could change back to the way you were, would you do it? The answer, I'm not sure, really. The Darwin-Wedgwood family. Charles Darwin, renowned scientist, father of evolutionary theory, and one of the brightest minds of the 19th century, was also part of a family whose private choices reveal a more troubling story. Darwin married his first cousin, Emma Wedgwood, continuing a practice that was all too common among wealthy, well-connected families of the era. At the time, cousin marriages weren't seen as strange or taboo. Among the upper class, they were often encouraged. Families believed they were safeguarding their most valuable traits, intelligence, creativity, social status, by keeping those traits within the bloodline. To them, this was a way to preserve and even enhance their superior lineage. But for the Darwin-Wedgwood clan, that strategy came with heartbreaking consequences. Charles and Emma had 10 children, but 3 of them died at a young age. While not all of the causes are well documented, experts believe that their children's fragile health and vulnerability to disease may have been worsened by the genetic similarities between Charles and Emma. It's a harsh reality. Marrying within such a close family circle can amplify the risk of passing on harmful genetic conditions. Their experience paints a powerful picture of the unintended costs of inbreeding, even among families that produce some of history's greatest thinkers. While Charles Darwin himself would go on to study heredity and variation in nature, the genetic risks within his own household served as a personal, painful example of what happens when families prioritize legacy over biological diversity. But it's important to understand that the Darwins were not alone. In the 1800s, cousin marriage was still widely accepted, not just in England but across much of Europe. The belief in strengthening bloodlines was deeply rooted in the thinking of the time. Families thought they were preserving excellence, unaware of the hidden genetic dangers they were courting. Which of these inbred families shocked you the most and why? The Habsburg dynasty. For generations, the Habsburgs weren't just rulers. They were the power brokers of Europe. Their family tree stretched across empires, their decisions shaped the fate of entire nations, and their name was synonymous with royalty. But behind the grandeur of their palaces and the sheen of their crowns hid a disturbing reality that would one day bring their mighty lineage to its knees: inbreeding. Their approach to maintaining power was calculated. Marry strategically. Link bloodlines with other monarchies to expand influence and hold on to territory. At first it worked like a charm, strengthening alliances and keeping outsiders at bay. But over time, that same strategy turned inward. The desire to keep royal blood pure led to marriages between close relatives, cousins, uncles and nieces, even aunts and nephews. The cost? It grew heavier with each passing generation. Picture the royal court: shining chandeliers, gold-trimmed walls, nobles in lavish attire. Yet among them walked heirs born with obvious signs of genetic strain. None more infamous than the so-called Habsburg jaw. It wasn't a small cosmetic flaw, it was a severe protrusion of the lower jaw that could leave its victims unable to chew properly or speak clearly. And it was only one of many signs of a bloodline cracking under the pressure of its own traditions. By the late 1500s, especially within the Spanish Habsburg branch, the damage was undeniable. The family line became riddled with illnesses, both physical and mental. Babies were born fragile and sickly. Many didn't survive infancy. Others grew up to be weak or mentally impaired, never fit to rule. And yet the inbreeding continued, driven by the fear of losing power to outsiders. The heartbreaking final chapter came in 1700, with the death of King Charles II of Spain. He was the last of the Spanish Habsburgs, and a living symbol of all that had gone wrong. Sickly, infertile, and plagued by both physical and cognitive issues, Charles embodied the dynasty's self-inflicted demise. He couldn't father a child, and with his passing, the once great Spanish branch of the Habsburgs faded into history. Their downfall wasn't due to war or political rebellion. It came from within, a dynasty undone by its own misguided quest for control and purity. The Pitcairn Islanders. It all began with a mutiny in 1789 aboard the HMS Bounty. The mutineers, desperate to escape the harsh rule of the British Navy, turned against their commander and vanished into the vast Pacific. They weren't just running from a ship, they were searching for a life on their own terms. They founded on Pitcairn Island, a tiny, hidden patch of land far removed from any authority. Alongside several Tahitian women they had taken with them, the mutineers created a new settlement. But with no contact from the outside world, this fragile community became a social experiment unlike any other, one shaped by deep isolation and the unavoidable consequences of a shrinking gene pool. By 1817, all but one of the original mutineers had died. John Adams, along with Ned Young before him, had laid the foundation for a society built on strict religious teachings. Adams leaned heavily on the Bible to govern the tiny island population. But despite this surface-level order, the reality was far more complicated. As the years passed, Pitcairn's population slowly grew, peaking at around 200 people by 1936. But over time, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. In this closed-off society where families were interconnected and outside norms had long since vanished, sexual abuse, especially involving minors, became normalized. Passed down quietly from generation to generation, it became a hidden part of island life. The world would remain unaware of this terrible truth until the early 2000s. That's when New Zealand authorities launched an investigation, uncovering decades of abuse. The findings were horrifying. Several men, including prominent community leaders, were convicted for crimes against children. The tiny island was forced to confront the darkest parts of its legacy. Today, fewer than 50 people live on Pitcairn. They remain isolated, still trying to come to terms with a painful past that has left deep scars. Their story isn't just one of abuse. It's about what happens when a community becomes cut off from the world, how values can erode over time, and how hard it can be to recover when trauma becomes generational. The Ptolemaic dynasty. The Ptolemaic dynasty is often remembered as the grand finale of ancient Egypt's royal saga, a time of towering temples, dazzling wealth, and legendary figures like Cleopatra. But behind all that splendor was a practice so dangerous, it helped unravel the very dynasty it was meant to protect: incest. It all began after the death of Alexander the Great, when one of his trusted generals, Ptolemy I Soter, took control of Egypt. He founded the Ptolemaic line, which ruled for nearly 300 years. To strengthen their claim as rightful heirs to the Pharaohs, and to boost their status as living gods, the Ptolemies turned to a strategy as old as Egyptian royalty itself: marrying their own blood. But this wasn't about love or even tradition. It was a cold, calculated political move. Brothers married sisters, uncles wed nieces. The goal was to keep the royal bloodline pure and untouchable. Yet over time, these repeated in-family unions brought devastating results. Clear signs of inbreeding depression began to show in both body and mind. If you take a closer look at ancient portraits and coins from the era, many Ptolemaic rulers appear unusually heavy or bloated. This wasn't just an artistic style. Experts now believe that their obesity and bloated features could point to rare genetic conditions like Erdheim-Chester disease or familial multifocal fibrosclerosis, both of which can cause serious physical complications and, in some cases, mental decline. These conditions, possibly inherited through their tangled family tree, likely affected their ability to rule effectively. One of the most striking examples is Cleopatra VII, the dynasty's final and most famous ruler. She married two of her younger brothers in line with family tradition, reinforcing the same destructive cycle. While Cleopatra is celebrated for her political savvy and intelligence, she was also the product of a gene pool that had been narrowing for generations. And while she famously held her own against Roman giants like Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, the cracks within her family were already deep. The Ptolemaic dynasty didn't fall just because Rome came knocking. Its collapse was just as much about what was happening behind palace walls: years of medical issues, mental health struggles, and political chaos brought on by rulers whose very DNA had been compromised by their own traditions. Thank you for watching. To continue with more content, comment yes to let us know you're still following. the British royal family. The British royal family, iconic, influential, and deeply woven into the fabric of world history. But behind the grand ceremonies and regal portraits lies a lesser-known legacy, a troubling pattern of inherited illness, shaped by centuries of strategic intermarriage. For generations, Britain's monarchs sought to strengthen alliances by marrying into other European royal families. These unions were political chess moves, keeping the crown secure, maintaining peace, and expanding influence. But over time, these close family ties also had a hidden cost: the increased risk of passing down genetic disorders. One of the most famous and mysterious cases is King George III, often referred to as the Mad King. He endured multiple episodes of mental breakdowns, leading some historians and doctors to suspect porphyria, a rare genetic disorder that affects the nervous system. Symptoms can include confusion, hallucinations, and even the odd detail of blue-colored urine. Yet in more recent years, others have argued he may have suffered from bipolar disorder instead. Whatever the exact cause, his condition was likely intensified by the tightly interwoven bloodlines of Europe's royal families. The very practice meant to keep the monarchy secure may have worsened his mental health struggles. But perhaps the most devastating genetic legacy in the royal family is hemophilia, a serious condition that prevents blood from clotting properly. This disorder made even a minor injury potentially fatal. The disease made its way into the royal bloodline through Queen Victoria, who was a carrier of the hemophilia gene. Her son, Prince Leopold, inherited the condition, and through Victoria's daughters, the gene spread rapidly into other European monarchies, including the royal families of Russia, Spain, and Germany. Because of these intermarriages, hemophilia earned the grim nickname, the royal disease. The condition devastated royal households across Europe, resulting in tragic deaths and lifelong suffering. What began as a calculated way to preserve power ultimately passed along a silent genetic curse, one that revealed just how fragile these royal bloodlines had become. The Pharaohs of ancient Egypt. When we hear names like Tutankhamun, Ramses II, and Cleopatra VII, we picture towering pyramids, golden tombs, and rulers who were worshipped like gods. But behind the splendor of ancient Egypt's royal legacy lies a darker truth, one of systemic inbreeding that left deep scars on the pharaoh's bloodline. In ancient Egypt, the pharaoh wasn't just a king, he was seen as a living god, a direct descendant of the divine. To protect this sacred status, the royal family developed a very specific strategy: marrying within the family, often between siblings or close relatives. This wasn't about romance. It was about preserving power, keeping the divine blood undiluted, and reinforcing the pharaoh's unquestioned right to rule. But the price of this divine purity was steep. Take Tutankhamun, the boy king who ruled Egypt briefly and died young. Modern science has revealed that he suffered from multiple genetic disorders: a clubfoot, scoliosis, a compromised immune system, all likely due to generations of inbreeding. His own parents were full siblings. Tutankhamun's weakened body was not just a medical condition, it was the tragic result of a royal tradition that prioritized bloodline over biology. Even towering figures like Ramses II and Cleopatra VII, though remembered for their strength and charisma, came from the same tightly closed gene pool. While their physical or mental conditions are harder to pin down, it's highly probable that they too bore the unseen consequences of this centuries-old practice. And this wasn't an isolated decision made by a few rulers. For over 1,000 years, sibling and close relative marriage was a common and accepted practice among Egyptian royalty. It was a deeply rooted cultural belief that divine lineage must remain pure, even if the result was physical frailty or early death. What this story reveals is powerful: how religion, politics, and tradition can intertwine to create a system that seems unshakable, even when it harms its own people. In ancient Egypt's case, the pursuit of eternal power led to generations of rulers whose very bodies bore the burden of their divine claims. The Bourbon dynasty. The Bourbons were once the towering force behind two of Europe's greatest kingdoms, France and Spain, steering the fate of the continent for centuries. Their story is one of grandeur, politics, and legacy, but also of a dangerous secret that undermined their very strength: inbreeding. Like many noble houses of their time, the Bourbons believed in preserving royal bloodlines at all costs. From the 1500s to the early 1900s, they arranged marriages among close relatives, cousins, uncles, and nieces, and even tighter connections, all in the name of consolidating power and upholding the illusion of divine right. But what they gained in political unity, they paid for in human frailty. The toll became impossible to ignore. Across generations, the family suffered from a variety of genetic and neurological conditions: infertility, hemophilia, epilepsy, and, more disturbingly, serious mental illnesses. Some modern historians and medical researchers believe conditions like bipolar disorder and schizophrenia may have run rampant in the bloodline, made worse or even caused by inbreeding. One of the most striking examples is Philip V of Spain, who reportedly battled deep psychological disturbances during his reign. His son, Fernando VI, showed similar symptoms, suggesting that the condition wasn't an isolated case but part of a broader genetic issue. Contrast that with King Carlos III, Felipe's son by a different mother who showed no signs of mental illness. A powerful indicator that mixing the gene pool may have had a protective effect. Though we can't say definitively that inbreeding caused all these issues, the patterns are too consistent to ignore. The very marriages that were meant to protect the dynasty likely chipped away at the health and stability of its leaders, undermining their ability to govern effectively. And perhaps no line captures the irony of this royal paradox better than the anonymous quote, "Now I might have my enemies, but I have the adoration of my people. You think because I'm king that I'm not also a brother?" The Colt family of Australia. The Colt family, a name that became synonymous with one of the most disturbing and eye-opening cases in modern Australian history. In 2012, authorities discovered a shocking situation hidden deep in the rural countryside of New South Wales. A family living in extreme isolation, bound not just by blood, but by a chilling cycle of inbreeding, neglect, and secrecy. What they found was more than just a broken household. It was a web of generational abuse where many of the family members didn't even know who their biological parents were. Children were born from relationships between siblings, cousins, and in some cases, even closer relatives. The Colt family's compound had no running water, no proper sanitation, and no education system. The living conditions were appalling, but even worse were the emotional and physical consequences for the children growing up in that world. The investigation painted a bleak picture: a family so disconnected from society that basic moral and legal boundaries had eroded completely. And it raised some deeply uncomfortable questions. How could this happen in modern Australia? How did it go undetected for so long? Why didn't anyone step in sooner? The Colt case became a national wake-up call. It exposed the cracks in Australia's welfare and education systems, gaps that allowed a family like this to slip through unnoticed for decades. It also forced a hard conversation about the importance of early intervention, community awareness, and the role society must play in protecting children in remote or overlooked areas. But the shockwaves didn't stop at Australia's borders. Around the world, the Colt family's story became a symbol of how isolation, when combined with generational trauma and a lack of oversight, can lead to devastating consequences. Mental and physical health were both deeply impacted, as was the very concept of family and identity for those caught in the cycle. Have you heard of any lesser-known inbreeding stories we should cover next? The global history of inbreeding. Inbreeding, the union of close relatives, might strike many of us today as taboo or even shocking. But throughout history, it was far more commonplace and culturally accepted than you might think. This wasn't just about ignorance or lack of options. Often, inbreeding was driven by tradition, power, and the belief in preserving a pure bloodline. In ancient civilizations where kings and emperors were often seen as divine, Marrying within the family wasn't just accepted, it was expected. A prime example is the royal family of Egypt, where pharaohs were believed to be living gods. To keep their divinity intact, they often married their sisters or other close relatives. The famous union of Akhenaten and Nefertiti illustrates this deeply held belief. Their relationship wasn't just political, it was spiritual, symbolic of maintaining divine authority through blood. But the Egyptians weren't alone. Fast forward to Europe's royal dynasties and you'll find a similar story. The House of Habsburg, one of the most powerful ruling families in European history, engaged in centuries of strategic intermarriage. The result? A cascade of genetic issues, the most visible being the Habsburg jaw, a severe underbite and jaw deformity passed down through generations. Alongside this physical trait came a host of other health complications that eventually weakened the family's ability to rule and led to their decline. Yet inbreeding wasn't exclusive to royal palaces. In many parts of the world, isolated communities faced a different kind of pressure: geography. On Tristan da Cunha, a remote island in the South Atlantic, residents had no choice but to marry within a very small population. Over time, intermarriage became a necessity rather than a choice, leading to an increased presence of certain inherited conditions. These weren't royal ambitions, just the natural consequence of extreme isolation. So, when we talk about inbreeding, we're really talking about a global phenomenon, one that crosses cultures, classes, and continents. In many cases, it was believed to be the right thing to do, preserving wealth, status, or spiritual purity. But the long-term effects, both genetic and social, reveal a harsh truth. When a population's gene pool becomes too limited, the consequences can be profound and often tragic. The genetic consequences of inbreeding. For centuries, people noticed something wasn't quite right when close relatives married. Children born from these unions often suffered from mysterious health problems. But it wasn't until the 19th century, thanks to the work of a quiet monk named Gregor Mendel, that the science behind these patterns came into focus. Mendel's experiments with pea plants helped reveal the basic laws of inheritance, how traits are passed down from parents to children. What he uncovered was groundbreaking. When individuals share too much of the same genetic material, the odds of passing on harmful recessive genes increase dramatically. In a typical pairing, a dominant healthy gene can often mask a recessive one. But in close relative unions, both parents are more likely to carry the same faulty gene, meaning the child has a greater chance of inheriting two defective copies, which can lead to serious illnesses and genetic disorders. In the early 20th century, another scientific giant, Sir Ronald Fisher, took this understanding even further. He introduced the coefficient of inbreeding, a way to mathematically estimate just how likely it is that a child will inherit two identical genes from a shared ancestor. His work gave scientists a tool to measure the genetic risks of inbreeding in a way that was both predictive and actionable. But this isn't just theory, it's real life. One powerful modern example comes from the remote island of Pingalop in Micronesia. After a devastating typhoon in the 18th century reduced the population to just a few dozen people, generations of inbreeding followed. The result? A large percentage of the population now suffers from achromatopsia, a rare condition where people see the world entirely in black and white. On Pingalop, what was once a rare genetic trait became common, all because of a genetic bottleneck and continued intermarriage. Fortunately, modern science gives us the tools to fight back. Genetic counseling and screening now help families understand their risks before having children. In places where inbreeding is still practiced, either by tradition or necessity, these tools are essential in protecting future generations from preventable genetic harm. The story of inbreeding, then, is not just about ancient royal families or isolated communities. It's also about what we've learned and how we can use that knowledge to create healthier, more informed societies. Genetics doesn't just tell us where we come from, it helps us decide where we're going. Genetic guardians, modern tools, and hope. We've entered a bold new chapter in human history, the genomic era, where our understanding of genetics has expanded beyond what anyone thought possible just a few decades ago. And with it, we now have powerful tools to confront one of humanity's oldest and most persistent issues: the genetic consequences of inbreeding. The turning point came in 2003 with the completion of the Human Genome Project. For the first time ever, scientists had a complete map of the human genetic code, a detailed blueprint of the genes that shape everything from eye color to inherited diseases. This massive achievement unlocked new possibilities for identifying genetic disorders, especially those that become more common when genetic diversity is reduced, as happens in closely related pairings. At the heart of today's approach is genetic testing and counseling. These tools allow individuals to discover whether they carry recessive genes that, if paired with another carrier, could lead to serious inherited conditions in their children. For communities with a history of inbreeding, or for those at risk due to limited gene pools, this is nothing short of life-changing. One of the best examples of this progress in action is the Dor Yeshurim program, launched in the 1980s. Designed for the Ashkenazi Jewish community, where certain genetic disorders like Tay-Sachs disease occur more frequently, the program uses anonymous screening to identify carrier couples before they marry. The results have been stunning: a sharp drop in the number of children born with these devastating diseases. It's proof that knowledge and planning can save lives, but the tools are only part of the equation. Just as important are the people who help interpret them, genetic counselors. These professionals guide families through complex genetic information and help them understand their options. The idea of genetic counseling actually dates back to the 1940s, when geneticist Sheldon Reed coined the term and emphasized its ethical foundation, helping people make informed, value-driven choices about their health and family futures. Thanks to these advancements, we're no longer powerless against the risks of inbreeding. We now have the ability to identify, predict, and prevent genetic conditions before they take root. While the past reminds us of the dangers seen in royal bloodlines, isolated communities, and tragic case studies, the future offers something far more hopeful. This is more than a scientific victory. It's about empowering individuals and families with the knowledge to protect their health and shape the future of their genetic legacy, breaking the cycle of inherited suffering and replacing it with a legacy of choice, understanding, and hope. History's most tragic giant. They were giants in every sense: admired, stared at, even worshipped. Anna Haining Bates once stood before Queen Victoria. Andre the Giant filled stadiums with roaring fans. But behind their towering fame were lives marked by pain, loneliness, and loss. This is the untold story of two extraordinary people who seemed larger than life, but couldn't escape the weight of it. Andre the Giant. You've probably heard of legends in the world of wrestling: Hulk Hogan, Macho Man, Randy Savage, maybe even Ric Flair. But there was one man who stood above them all, literally and figuratively. Andre the Giant wasn't just a wrestler, he was a phenomenon. They called him the eighth wonder of the world, and not just as a gimmick. He could drink 156 beers in one night, lift a car off the ground with his bare hands, and draw crowds by the thousands just by showing up. But behind the myth was a man, a real man, who lived in constant pain, struggled to fit into a world built for average-sized people, and quietly carried the burden of being too big for almost everything. A giant is born. André René Roussimoff was born on May 19, 1946, in the small countryside town of Coulommiers, France. His family lived a simple, hard-working life on a farm, never imagining that one of their 5 children would become a global sensation. But from the start, André stood out, literally. He weighed nearly 13 pounds at birth, already bigger than most newborns. As he grew, it became clear that something was different. By age 12, André stood at a staggering 6 feet 3 inches tall, towering over teachers and classmates alike. And this wasn't just a growth spurt, it was the beginning of a lifelong transformation. At 14, when compulsory education ended in France, André left school to work on the family farm. He later took a job at a local factory, doing his part like any other young man in rural France. But his body wasn't done growing. By the time he reached adulthood, André measured an unbelievable 7 feet 4 inches tall and weighed over 500 pounds. He wasn't just tall, he was massive, with hands like catcher's mitts and a voice that rumbled like thunder. Even everyday things like finding clothes or walking through doorways became challenges. When he turned 17 and was summoned for military service, the army quickly realized they weren't equipped to handle someone like André. No uniform fit, no boots came close, and even the bunk beds couldn't support his size. So, in a rare move, the government excused him from service. It was one of the first times André's sheer size bent the rules of the world around him, but it wouldn't be the last. Discovery in Paris? At 18, André left the quiet life of the farm behind and moved to Paris, hoping to find work and maybe a new path. What he found instead was destiny. While working construction jobs to make ends meet, his immense size drew constant attention. None more important than from a local wrestling promoter who took one look at André and saw a gold mine. He convinced the young man to step into the ring, not just as a novelty, but as a spectacle. That's when André adopted the name Géant Ferré, based on a mythical French giant from folklore. It wasn't long before André was traveling across Europe, wrestling in packed halls and sports arenas in Germany, the United Kingdom, and eventually Japan and Canada. In every country, the reaction was the same. Audiences couldn't believe their eyes. Wrestling promoters began billing him as the Roussimoff Monster, and he delivered on that title, tossing opponents like rag dolls and drawing standing ovations everywhere he went. But André wasn't just big, he was quick on his feet, shockingly agile for a man of his size. In the ring, he moved with purpose and surprising grace, giving performances that blurred the line between strength and showmanship. Though he was still years away from becoming a household name, the groundwork was being laid. What started as a way to make money turned into a career that would soon take him to North America and into the history books. Becoming André the Giant. Everything changed for André in 1971 when he met Vince McMahon Sr., the powerful promoter behind the Worldwide Wrestling Federation, what we now know as WWE. McMahon instantly recognized André's potential, but he also saw a need for reinvention. Up to that point, André had been marketed as a novelty, a giant sideshow attraction. But McMahon had a bigger vision. He advised André to slow down his wrestling style, to move deliberately to become not just a big man, but a living myth. And with that shift came a new name, André the Giant. It was simple, it was powerful, and it stuck. From that point on, the name André the Giant wasn't just a wrestling persona, it was a brand, a legend in the making. As his star rose, so did the demands on his body. Around this time, André was diagnosed with a rare condition called acromegaly, caused by an overactive pituitary gland that floods the body with growth hormone. It explained everything, his enormous hands, his deep voice, his towering frame. But it also came with a dark side, chronic pain, joint issues, and a shortened life expectancy. For André, the very thing that made him famous was also slowly wearing him down. Still, none of that slowed him yet. André embraced the spotlight. He didn't need a championship belt to prove his worth. His presence alone filled arenas. While other wrestlers built their reputation by winning titles, André didn't need them. He was the main event just by walking into the room. Everywhere he went, fans stood in awe. André the Giant wasn't just a wrestler anymore, he was a phenomenon, a walking wonder, and the face of a new era in professional wrestling. Life on the road, a giant's daily struggles. As André's fame exploded, so did his travel schedule. Back in the 1970s and 80s, professional wrestling wasn't the global empire it is today. It was regional, divided into territories, each with its own fan base and television broadcast. That worked in André's favor. Because there was no internet and limited national coverage, most people only saw him once. When Andre arrived in a new city, it felt like a once-in-a-lifetime event. Promoters booked him as a special attraction, someone who could fill an arena simply by stepping into the ring. But behind the curtain, Andre's life on the road was grueling. Airplanes, for example, were a nightmare. Andre couldn't fit into a standard seat, so he was forced to book 2 first-class tickets just to have enough space. Even then, his knees pressed into the seat in front of him, and using the airplane bathroom? Nearly impossible. Hotel beds were too short, showers too cramped, and toilets too fragile for his size. The world simply wasn't built for someone like Andre. And then there were the taxis, especially in Japan. Andre was so enormous that drivers were genuinely afraid of him. One time, he had to hide around the corner while another wrestler flagged down a cab. But when Andre stepped out to get in, the driver saw him, screamed, "No, no, no," and hit the gas. Without flinching, Andre calmly reached out and grabbed the rear bumper, holding the car in place like it was nothing. The driver wasn't going anywhere until Andre let go. That story became legend among wrestlers. For most people, travel meant freedom. For Andre, it was a constant reminder of just how different and how difficult his life really was. Strength, respect, and a few broken ribs. In the world of wrestling, matches may be scripted, but Andre's strength was anything but pretend. Inside the ring, he didn't just perform, he commanded respect. And while most wrestlers played by the rules, everyone knew that if Andre didn't like you, he could make your night very real very quickly. He had a gentle nature, yes, but cross him, and you'd feel the full force of the giant. There's a famous story involving real-life boxer Chuck Wepner, the same man who inspired Rocky. In a special match, Wepner threw legitimate punches, but they barely fazed Andre. Finally, when Andre had enough, he scooped the heavyweight boxer up like a sack of laundry and tossed him over the ropes as if he were made of paper. The crowd roared, but that was no show. That was pure strength. And then there's the barroom story. Andre was having a quiet drink when a local tough guy decided to pick a fight. Andre tried to brush him off, even offering to buy the man a drink, but the guy wouldn't back down. Finally, without losing his cool, Andre stood up, lifted the man clear off the ground, and flung him across the room. The guy landed hard, broken ribs and all. The greatest drinker who ever lived. If Andre's strength made him a legend, his drinking made him a myth. Nearly every wrestler who traveled with him has a story, and they all sound too wild to be true. But the truth is, Andre the Giant could drink like no one else on earth. It wasn't just a party trick, it was part of his routine, his way of coping, and maybe a bit of both. He reportedly consumed around 7,000 calories of alcohol a day. To stay warm in colder climates, he'd casually sip 2 bottles of vodka, like someone else might have a cup of tea. One night at the Tampa Airport's Delta Lounge, Andre sat down and drank 108 beers in a single sitting. Let that sink in. 108. That's more than 4 cases. For most people, that's fatal. For Andre, it was just Thursday. It didn't stop there. During a hotel stay in England, he racked up a $40,000 bar tab over the course of a month. On a trip to Japan, he polished off 12 bottles of French wine in 3 hours. And on a flight from Chicago to Tokyo, sitting next to Ric Flair, Andre drank every last bottle of vodka on the plane. On another trip, this one from Miami to Dayton, he and Hillbilly Jim went through 56 mini vodka bottles. Andre drank 50 of them. Before stepping into the ring, his pre-match ritual was equally astonishing. 6 bottles of Portuguese wine. Just to loosen up. One night, for his final round, Andre calmly ordered 40 shots of vodka, and the bartender stayed late to pour every last one. It was entertaining, sure, but underneath the laughs and disbelief, you could see the truth. Andre was drinking not just for fun, but to dull the pain that came with being a living giant in a world too small to hold him. Pain behind the fame. For all his strength, Andre lived in near constant pain. His condition, acromegaly, didn't just make him grow, it wore his body down from the inside out. By the time he was in his 30s, every movement was a struggle. His back ached, his knees throbbed. Even getting out of bed in the morning took effort, but Andre wasn't one to complain. He kept it to himself, smiled for the fans, and did the job. Still, the pain was real, and it was relentless. While filming The Princess Bride, a movie that introduced him to an entirely new generation, Andre's back was in such bad shape that he couldn't even hold his co-star Robin Wright, who weighed barely 110 pounds. For a key scene, a hidden rig had to be used just to make it look like she was in his arms. That's how much pain he was in. And in the ring, the giant who once moved with surprising speed and agility now appeared slower, more deliberate. The spark was still there, but his body was fading. His legendary match with Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania 3 wasn't just a scripted passing of the torch. It was a real turning point, the beginning of the end for a man whose body had carried the weight of greatness for far too long. A gentle goodbye. In January 1993, Andre returned to France to attend his father's funeral. It was a somber trip, one that brought him back to the countryside where his story had begun. While staying in a Paris hotel, Andre passed away in his sleep. He was just 46 years old. The official cause of death was congestive heart failure. His massive heart, quite literally, could no longer keep up. The wrestling world was stunned but not surprised. Everyone knew Andre had been in pain. What many didn't realize was just how much he had quietly endured. Soon after, the WWE created its Hall of Fame, and Andre the Giant was the very first person to be inducted. What's your favorite memory of Andre the Giant? Were you lucky enough to see him live, or do you remember the first time you watched him on screen? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear them. Anna Haining Bates. She was one of the tallest women to ever walk the earth. So tall, in fact, that strangers stopped in their tracks. Children stared wide-eyed, and newspapers dubbed her the largest woman in the world. A giant child in a small world? Anna Haining Bates was born on August 6, 1846, in the quiet village of Millbrook, Nova Scotia. Her parents, Anne Graham and Alexander Swan, were Scottish immigrants trying to build a better life in the Canadian countryside. They had 12 other children, all perfectly average in size and stature. But Anna was different from the very beginning. Some say she was born an average baby. Others claim she weighed an astonishing 13 pounds at birth. Either way, it didn't take long for everyone to notice she wasn't like the others. By the time Anna was just 4 years old, she stood over 4 feet tall and weighed more than 90 pounds. And she didn't stop growing. At 15, she measured a staggering 7 feet tall. But Anna's size wasn't just a passing phase. She continued to grow beyond that, eventually reaching over 7.5 feet tall, making her one of the tallest women in recorded history. Although there was no formal diagnosis in her lifetime, we now know Anna most likely had gigantism, a rare condition caused by a tumor on the pituitary gland. This led to the overproduction of growth hormone, which explained her remarkable size, and the many health problems that came with it. She lived with constant strain on her joints, organs, and bones. And although the condition often shortens lifespans, Anna faced her challenges with a strength and gentleness that left a lasting impression on everyone she met. While the world saw her as a spectacle, her family saw her as a daughter and sister. Her father built her a custom bed and specially made school furniture. They did what they could to make her feel included in a world that wasn't built for her. But even their love couldn't shield her from what was coming next. Turned into a public attraction. As Anna's height continued to climb, so did public curiosity. Word spread quickly across Nova Scotia about the infant giantess, and before long people began showing up at the Bates family farm, just to catch a glimpse of her. Local newspapers ran stories about the remarkable young girl who towered over her peers. Some were respectful, others sensationalized her. But all of it made one thing clear. The public fascination with Anna wasn't going away. The Bates family, while deeply loving and protective, faced a difficult reality. Life on the farm wasn't easy, and Anna's size came with extra costs. Custom clothing, special shoes, and daily challenges that required creative solutions. So, out of both necessity and practicality, Her parents made a hard decision. They began to take Anna to local fairs and exhibitions. There, she was shown to the public as a curiosity, an astonishing sight, a giantess from the Maritimes. It's a decision that sparked debate ever since. Some historians have criticized it as exploitative, while others see it as the only viable way for the family to support Anna and manage the financial burden her condition brought. But there's something important to remember. Anna was never left to fend for herself. Her parents accompanied her everywhere. They chose events carefully, staying away from anything shady or inappropriate. Wherever Anna went, her family was right there beside her, watching, guiding, and protecting. And through it all, Anna maintained a quiet grace. Even as people stared or whispered, she tried her best to smile, to answer questions kindly, and to carry herself with dignity. She was becoming more than a sideshow attraction. She was beginning to find her voice, even if the world hadn't learned to truly hear her yet. A dream dashed, and a new path forward. Despite the crowds and the curiosity, Anna longed for something simple, something most people take for granted. She wanted to live a normal life. She doted on her younger siblings, helped with chores, and spent her free time reading and drawing. More than anything, Anna dreamed of becoming a teacher. She loved books, loved learning, and hoped one day to stand in front of a classroom, not as an object of fascination, but as a mentor. She even took a bold step toward that dream. As a teenager, she moved to another city to live with her aunt and attend school. But the dream didn't last. The classrooms were too cramped. The desks were impossible for her to use. Worse still were the stares and whispers from strangers on the streets, curious looks that made her feel like she didn't belong. Despite her determination, the message was clear. The world wasn't ready to accommodate a woman like Anna. It was a crushing blow, but she wasn't alone. One of her greatest sources of strength was her grandmother, a proud Highland Scot, who saw something powerful in her granddaughter. "Stand tall and be proud of your Highland ancestry," she told Anna. And somehow those words took root. They reminded Anna that her size wasn't a flaw, it was part of who she was. A blessing, a responsibility, a way to stand tall in more ways than one. With renewed strength, Anna began to look at her life differently. If she couldn't teach in a classroom, maybe she could educate people in other ways. If the world wouldn't stop staring, maybe she could give them something meaningful to look at. That shift in perspective would take her far from Nova Scotia and straight into the spotlight of one of the most famous showmen in history. The Nova Scotian giantess takes the stage. In 1862, Anna made a bold move. At just 16, she crossed the border into the United States to join P.T. Barnum's famed American Museum in New York City. There, she was billed as the Nova Scotian giantess. An astonishing sight, to be sure, but Anna wasn't content to just be stared at. She saw the opportunity for what it really was, a platform, a chance to earn money, receive an education, and take back control of her story. And to Barnum's credit, the arrangement was surprisingly fair. Anna earned $23 a week in gold, a generous sum for the time, and she had a personal chaperone to ensure her safety. Even more impressively, she was allowed to sell photographs of herself and keep the profits. In a time when most women had little financial independence, Anna had carved out a rare space for herself, both as a professional and as a person. While working at the museum, Anna thrived. She received private tutoring, learned to play piano, improved her singing voice, and even took on dramatic roles on stage. She portrayed characters like Lady Macbeth, not just for spectacle, but with real performance skill. She also began holding question and answer sessions with museum audiences, sharing her life, her thoughts, and her humanity with those who came just to gawk. In doing so, she began to turn the tables. She wasn't just an exhibit anymore, she was a storyteller, a presence, a teacher in her own right. But in 1865, disaster struck. A massive fire engulfed Barnum's museum. Anna, weighing nearly 400 pounds and too tall for the windows, was trapped as the flames rose around her. With no escape route, panic set in. until 18 people working together carried her to safety. She was the last to make it out. She lost everything she owned, but she didn't leave until others had escaped first. In that moment, she wasn't just the Nova Scotian giantess, she was a hero. Royalty, romance, and recognition. Anna's fame didn't stop with stage performances. Her grace, intelligence, and quiet charm caught the attention of people far beyond the world of show business, including royalty. During her travels through Europe, Anna formed an unlikely and heartfelt friendship with none other than Queen Victoria herself. The Queen, known for her interest in people who defied societal norms, found in Anna a kindred spirit, someone dignified, intelligent, and completely unforgettable. But that wasn't the only life-changing connection Anna would make. While visiting a circus in Halifax, she met Martin Van Buren Bates, a fellow giant who stood over 7 feet tall and weighed nearly 500 pounds. It was quite literally a meeting of equals. They understood each other in a way no one else could, sharing not only a profession but the daily challenges of living in a world not built for people their size. Their connection was instant, and their bond only deepened as they began touring together. In 1871, Anna and Martin were married in London, and their wedding quickly became international news. When Queen Victoria heard the news, she sent the couple an extraordinary gift: a custom-made wedding gown created from 100 meters of satin and 50 meters of lace, embroidered with orange blossoms. And that was just the beginning. The couple was invited to Buckingham Palace, where the Queen personally gifted Anna a beautiful diamond ring and presented Martin with a gold watch and chain. They would go on to visit the palace at least 2 more times, cementing their place in the Queen's circle of admired guests. After their wedding tour, the couple settled in Seville, Ohio, where they designed a home to suit their unique proportions: tall ceilings, wide doorways, and massive beds. But they didn't forget others. The back portion of the house was built to standard size for guests and servants, a thoughtful touch that showed Anna and Martin's deep kindness and consideration. They tried to live a life of peace and comfort away from the public eye. But as much as Anna had already endured and achieved, the most personal and painful chapter of her life was still to come. Tragedy of motherhood. After years of touring, performing, and living under the public eye, Anna and Martin longed for something far more private and precious: a family of their own. Like so many couples, they dreamed of raising children, of filling their custom-built home with laughter and life. But for Anna, those dreams would end in unimaginable sorrow. In 1872, Anna gave birth to a baby girl. The child weighed an incredible 18 pounds at birth, far larger than most newborns. Sadly, the infant passed away not long after. It was a crushing blow, but Anna, ever resilient, pressed forward. Still, the grief lingered quietly in the background, a wound that had never fully healed. 6 years later, hope returned. Anna was pregnant again, this time with a boy. But from the start, the pregnancy was difficult. She suffered complications, including a massive loss of amniotic fluid. Labor dragged on, grueling and dangerous. When the moment finally came, the attending doctor was faced with an impossible challenge. The baby was simply too large to deliver with forceps. In the end, a risky and painful method was used to bring the child into the world. The baby boy was born weighing 23 pounds, so large he looked like a 6-month-old. It was a medical marvel, and a tragic one. The child lived for just 11 hours before passing away in Anna's arms. Later, he would be recognized by the Guinness Book of World Records as the heaviest baby ever born. For Anna, the loss was unbearable. 2 children, 2 funerals. The weight of that grief was heavier than any burden she had ever carried. She fell into a deep depression, retreating from public life and abandoning her once bright stage career. The world that once stared in awe now watched her disappear from view. She tried briefly to return to the circus, but the joy was gone. The sparkle had dimmed. Anna had faced many challenges in her life: loneliness, stares, physical hardship. But this pain? This was different. It wasn't something she could rise above. It stayed with her, reshaping the rest of her days in quiet, lasting sorrow. A quiet life after the spotlight. After the loss of their son, Anna and Martin turned away from the spotlight for good. The touring days, the public exhibitions, the performances, they all belonged to another life now. In the late 1870s, the couple focused instead on their farm in Seville, Ohio, pouring their time and energy into a quieter, more grounded existence. They became active members of their local Baptist church, where they found comfort in community and faith. Their home, once a place of wonder for curious visitors, became a haven of peace. And while the public's attention may have faded, their kindness never did. Anna and Martin were known throughout their town not just for their size, but for their generosity. One of Anna's greatest joys in this chapter of life was caring for animals. She was deeply compassionate toward creatures large and small. She opposed horse racing, believing it to be cruel, and took in rescued cattle and draft horses that had outlived their usefulness in the circus. She even adopted retired performing animals. One particularly mischievous monkey named Buttons became the subject of local legend for his antics with unsuspecting guests. The end of a remarkable life. In the spring of 1888, just one day before her 42nd birthday, Anna Haining Bates passed away in her sleep. The official cause was heart failure, brought on by complications from tuberculosis and thyroid disease. Conditions made worse by the long-term strain her body had endured. Her life, marked by towering height, immense compassion, and quiet strength, came to a gentle end in the home she had built with Martin. Her death was felt deeply in her community and by all who had known her. Martin, devastated but faithful to her memory, erected a monument at her gravesite. A year later, he remarried and moved to accommodate his new wife. But he made sure that when his own time came, he would be buried beside Anna and their son, forever connected to the love and the life they had shared. Today, Anna is remembered not only for her size, but for her story. In Seville, Ohio, a local museum holds artifacts and memories of her life. And in Halifax, Nova Scotia, a museum dedicated to her legacy is maintained with the help of her descendants. Preserving the journey of a woman who lived through spectacle, survived tragedy, and still managed to inspire those around her. So, what do you take away from Anna's story? Her resilience? Her kindness? Her strength in the face of grief? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear what moved you most. As science lifts the veil on our genetic past, we're better equipped to protect future generations. The mysteries may never end, but with knowledge we move forward, wiser and more aware of the delicate balance that shapes us all. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history's most inbred families, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to Past Not Past for more eye-opening tales. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.